not doing anything, so.
And then, I don't know if he's gonna be around.
I know.
It might be the
First one
float
to-
party.
Yes. I think that gets me out of,
A band.
what, yeah,
Is there
band.
gonna be a float again?
Yeah.
All the aldermen on the float?
If they want.
I don't know, I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, ready now, you said. It's being decorated.
Is that what
Oh,
you-
I want to do it too. I want to be on it.
I just ordered my.
I thought you said that you
boxes
know
of
how to
candy.
turn it.
Oh, yeah,
I
you
got
gotta
a
get that
bucket.
done.
Yeah, we'll be on vacation on my
Answered your
Thursday, so I
question
was like,
with-
oh my gosh, I said, do we need to do anything?
Before it all sells out.
Yeah.
But
Ready to
really
go?
good when it comes
Okay.
out.
All right, folks. Good evening. We are going to, thank you for coming for the Committee of the Whole on June 20th, 2023. Just checking to see if we have any sign-ins on the sign-in sheet for comment today. We don't have any. Okay, so because we don't have any public comment, we'll just jump right into our agenda. And the first item that we have on our agenda today is regarding the purchasing policy update discussion. And for that, we'll defer to Finance Director Molly Talkington.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Welcome to our EOC format tonight. So I'm going to stay seated so I can kind of talk to you and see the screen at the same time. And it's a little deviation from where we're normally at. But so we looked at kind of the purchasing manual as a whole here at the city, and finance staff. I even asked some of our high school interns to help look up things for me. So we're really trying to utilize interns and getting them involved in our projects. So our purchasing manual hasn't been updated in quite a while, right? It was originally adopted in 2000, had some changes to it in 2001, but not really substantial kind of look or feel to the purchasing manual. The administrative limit was kind of adopted separate before there was actually a purchasing document, and that is what is sometimes referred to the city manager's authority or a spending limit. So it kind of has different names, but I've been on here kind of calling it the administrative limit. So that has been set at $10,000 since 1991. So we haven't had any increase in that kind of administrative authority. So what we did in finance, and it's kind of in conjunction with our fiscal stability planning, it plays into how we can look at the policies and what's going forward, what we're going to bring to council as part of that fiscal stability planning, is what can we do with the purchasing manual, one, just to get it in line with current, state law, changes in how we purchase, and bring it a little bit more into the current now. And we did add efficiencies because we do have our financial software system. So we've incorporated some of that into how the purchasing manual works, and really more into the procedure side of it for the departments and how they'll use it. So our proposed revisions, I'm going to go over the big ones, the key ones, but if you look through the whole document, there are minor tweaks here and there, but for the majority, the big changes for the council will go over tonight. So the biggest one really is that approval of city purchases. We wanted to put more of a flow into how we look at purchasing and what's required for each thing. So on here, there's kind of two parts to this. It's anything under 5,001, right? So department heads, they can do informal quotes, verbal quotes. Then we move up to 5,001 to 10,000, where then it moves to the next step with the finance director. So I put these two here because incorporating that financial software, there's a spot in there when they're putting requisitions as the sample, where you can either type in the notes what the informal quotes are, or we can add attachments for those actual formal quotes. So now we'll have it attached to that record, and we'll have something easily accessible. And it'll also be, so if the Public Works Department starts to request, I can see it in finance, especially on those formal ones, or on the informal, the Public Works Director can see what the employee did to get those quotes. So we have a record of how that was handled. The next is the purchases. Well, you have the 10,000 to the 24,999 is also the formal written quote. And then adjusting the administrative limit to 25,000 is what this is based off of, and I'll go into more on that in a minute. But for purchases 25,000 and greater, we would go down the line of a request for proposal, qualifications, or the formal bid process. These become a little bit more regulation. So a bid process, you follow the rules of There's specifications we're looking for. It's written generic enough that it's not applicable just to one company, right? We need to have it open enough that most companies can bid on it. And we seek those bids blindly. We take them at the end. We open them at a certain time and compare what we got. Usually, the lowest bidder is the one that's awarded. Sometimes, I'd say it's the lowest qualified bidder. So sometimes there's some things that would rule out someone who is bidding. We also do things like the request for professional services. This is for like the audit. We want a little bit more history into what that company has done than just solely focusing on the numbers, if they meet kind of that professional service we're looking for. And then you also have, instead of just going straight to, you could ask for proposals, which includes pricings and specifications. You can do a two-step process and ask for qualifications first. And whoever applied to the request for qualifications then are the only companies that can bid then on the request for proposals. So there kind of gives us a different options depending on what we're looking at. And so again, we can use our financial software to kind of record those steps and put that into their process and keep it a little more organized and tracked and more efficient. So part of all of that is driven on changing the administrative limit from 10,000 to 25,000. And right now, each year we go, clearly these last few years, we've learned a lot about inflation and CPI and the drastic swings. So each year, our buying power has been reduced over those years. So $10,000 in 1991 is not buying as the same level of service or goods as it is today. So we looked at that. The state also has a purchasing threshold. They just adopted in 2017 that they moved to the $25,000 for the formal our bids and requisitions. And we also, I looked at kind of the consumer price index and comparable communities. Now, why the consumer price index? It measures, price changes, cost of living, and it's a little bit different than just inflation because it brings in factors that kind of show the change in spending by households, and that's really what we're looking at. That we're not a household, it's how it affects our spending on the goods and services we need. So when we look at CPI, if we had taken the $10,000 threshold and changed it with CPI, plus and minus, right? I lowered it in the years it went down, we would be kind of close to that $25,000 threshold that we're asking to move up to with a little bit over 21,000. And then we also then looked at where are our surrounding communities at. Is this, is 25,000 realistic right now? Is this a number we should focus on? And you can see we have a whole list here. But the big thing is the median is 25,000 and the average is a little bit above that. But we're kind of keeping in that same vein, and it's allowing us to kind of grab back that purchasing power from that we've lost over the years. So other changes to the manual, we looked at like surplus property disposal. So similar throughout, it's on this as well. We would change some of the limits because if we're changing the administrative limit, the limits in other areas also need to be looked at. So we, updated the disposal information to kind of tie to our current ordinances and then added a few changes like changing the dollar amount from 2,000 to 5,000 for the spending authority and really called out vehicles separately. So if council does give the direction to go forward and you like what you see, we will come back with the policy and also adjusting the ordinances because we don't want to adopt a policy and have the ordinance be out of line with it. So we will do kind of the two-step measure on any changes we would like to see. We also, like I said, changed anything if it referenced administrative limits. Everything was changed to the new proposed 25,000. Petty cash, I've reduced it. And what we actually have on hand for petty cash and police and fire or finance departments. It's not very often we're reimbursing people with cash these days. We typically, if we do have a travel for an employee or a purchase, we've been using kind of city procurement cards a little bit more. So there's been some advancements in that we don't have to have so much cash on hand. So I've reduced that number down just 800 in the building. So that lessens that kind of risk, even though it's a small risk, but it takes a little bit of that burden away. Oh, I'm sorry. And we changed things that reference specific dollar amounts. So from the original to now, there were certain things in there like the per diem for staff and it would reference a specific dollar amount. And then I found out people turned in reimbursement with a different amount, and then someone had to forward me an email that came from a prior city manager that updated it. And so there wasn't something really truly documented very well. So I wanted to kind of solidify it in the policy that here's where we find those amounts and here's how you get to it. And by this one is specifically linking to the government federal site for per diem rates. If they update like the mileage reimburse or the food per diem, then it's already linked to that website, and there's no reference to a dollar amount where we'd have to keep, coming back and saying, is this the correct dollar amount? So we tried to take any of those references where it was a hard number and link it to something if it was available, or if that was naturally where it was referenced, but the dollar amount was still shown in our policies. Those were the big kind of changes, and the format, clearly, when you look at it, is much different, more streamlined. I know it's a longer document than a lot of people anticipate, but we try to cover every kind of thing you can think of when you're purchasing, and include every kind of helpful hint or for departments on how to use it, and for transparency purposes, I try to include kind of like what is a request for proposal, because we might understand it at this table, but a resident might not know what that is offhand. So now they can go and read what it means. So really now, we're looking for your direction and input on the policy that you guys receive for review.
Thank you, Director Talkington. So with that, any thoughts or comments or questions at this point from the council? Yes, Alderman Fuller.
So this isn't as much about purchasing power as it is purchasing authority, correct? Giving you the authority to do more without having to go through an archaic number like you had from 30 years ago.
Correct. So what you've seen, I think the $10,000 limit, you've seen more and more kind of IT contracts come to you than you probably would have, and they're typically renewals of something. We can't really change that easily, some service we're using. But now that the $10,000 limit is low compared to the price of that service, council's starting to see things that are much more routine, where I think you sometimes read them and think, why is this coming in? We already know we need that email service, or we need, some other IT thing. By moving up to 25,000, you're not going to see those kind of routine things that you naturally think are being kind of improved year to year.
Yeah. So we're kind of over administrating things that we shouldn't be doing because our number's so low that everything's falling into the bucket. That's what
Yeah,
you're saying.
but naturally, let's say there is something that's 15,000. It's out of the ordinary. It's not something we've purchased before. Our city manager can always make the decision and say, you know what? I have the authority to do this without council approval, but it's unique enough, or it has something attached to it that he thinks you guys need your eyes on it and your opinion on it, then we can still always bring it to you when it's less than that. But this gives us the ability to kind of move those more routine purchases. There's also some exceptions in there for like utilities. It will go over 25,000. There's really a paragraph describing like utilities. We just pay for those during the year in the instances where we pay for those things without coming for council. So there's some exceptions to actually even more very restrictive on what we can purchase.
So the only thing I would recommend is to think about is to have some kind of sunset clause on this, or not necessarily sunset, but have something in there that says you would come back to us in every 3 years to review this, because 30 years is kind of ridiculous, don't you agree?
It was really a long time, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so because this is 30 years from now, these numbers are going to go up. Maybe we should just look at this and bring it back to us every third year to say, I think we need to bump this up to 28,000 or 29,000, whatever you think, but put a time frame in the ordinance that you're proposing here that says it's sooner than 30 years.
Yes, Alderman Bomatz.
Thank you, Mayor. So question, the $25,000 spending limit, is that in the whole, or is that an annual spending limit? So for example, if we were going to enter into a contract to do something that was $25,000 or $24,000 annually, but it was a 3-year contract, so the total obligation that the manager would be signing us to a $73,000. Is that, where does that fall?
So if we're doing a 3-year contract that's above 25,000, we would come to council for it. Unless it's something, you do a 1 year and then we get it the next year separately, but we ran 2 separate, quotes for it. They would be treated as separate instances, but if the contract's for 3 years and it's for $75,000, then we would come to council. So if you did it where it was 1 year at 25 or 24, and then the next year we went through and got proposals again, and it was 24 and it ended up the same company. In that instance, because they're separate quotes and separate process, we wouldn't come each year. But if we went out for that 3-year where it was over 25 for the total of 3 years, then we would come to council.
Thank you.
And just another clarification as well. We see the payment of bills on warrant as an item that comes up every 2 weeks for us. So the council can essentially say no to any amount on any purchase. What are some of the risks or consequences of a purchase that has gone through administrative approval and then ultimately then is rescinded by the council at a later time?
So it would be whatever the constraints were written on the agreement with that company. So in some instances, it could be, the penalty to break the contract is X amount of dollars versus what you would have paid for the service. So there's probably some financial in most contracts. If you're going to break the contract in whole, there would be probably some financial penalty for doing that. But ultimately, like you said, council does approve whether or not that bill is paid. And then we would come back to you on what because these contracts are written a little different, we'd have to come back to you on what the ultimate resolution would be for us breaking the contract.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions? Okay, so with that, it sounds like staff is looking for direction on the policy. We've had a question from Alderman Budmatz. We had a request from Alderman Kohler. And so at this point, are you looking to see if then there's direction and approval to move forward with the policy given those items?
Yes, please.
Okay, so let's do a straw vote. Those in favor of adopting the revised policy? It's unanimous.
So our next steps from here would be to come back to the council with a formal approval process that'll be listed on the July 11th agenda. As Finance Director Talkington mentioned earlier, we're also going to review the city code just to make sure that the code is in alignment with the policy itself. And so the adoption itself will come with 2 different approvals, one a resolution or ordinance. We'll work with our city attorney adopting the purchasing policy, and then second, an ordinance which would amend the city code with respect to purchasing so that the 2 are harmonious with one another and there are no contradictory terms between the purchasing policy and the city code.
Thank you for that. I also understand that we have another item that's not on the agenda that we'd like to discuss, and this is with regards to a fire safety exercise as well. So City Manager Sabo, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. City Council, I shared an email of a hold harmless and indemnification declaration that we would like to provide to Gallagher, Arthur J. Gallagher, the corporate entity. They are planning on demolishing the office building at 2550 Gulf Road. When they initially had brought up that they were planning to demolish that property, we made an inquiry with them to see if they would allow us to have our fire department go in and utilize that structure for training purposes. It's a rare and unique scenario in which a department can utilize a multi-story office building for such types of training. Gallagher instantly said yes, they are very welcoming of that opportunity, given that it translates into the fire department being ready to take care of their building if ever need be. And so as part of that, they have requested from the city to provide a hold harmless and indemnification declaration, which basically says that we are training, our employees are going into the property and we're assuming the liability of them doing so. That document was prepared by our city attorney and has been tendered to Gallagher, and their attorneys are reviewing it just to make sure it looks acceptable to them. The city code requires that such hold harmless and indemnification declarations are approved by the city council. Given that this is a time sensitive matter and that Gallagher is actively working to demolish that property in the coming days, they have said to us that they need this document back quickly in order for our fire department to mobilize and get in for training. And so I'm requesting the council's just consensus right now to allow me to proceed with executing that document, tendering it to Gallagher, so our fire department can train within the building prior to its demolition. And then that document would come back to the council in the July 11th meeting for formal ratification and approval. I do want to just mention one quick other note with this. As part of our training, specifically and especially with Public Works, Fire, and Police, it's very often that the training entities require a hold harmless and indemnification from the city. And as a matter of practice, I was not aware that this was a document or something that would have to be approved by the city council. So I'd like to recommend, and if the council supports this, bring forward an ordinance that would allow the manager to provide these types of hold harmless and indemnifications as we sign up for trainings, because given the safety elements and the risks involved with training on the police, fire, and public works side, these are standard day-to-day operating requests that we receive that would significantly, it would impact our ability to move quickly with signing up for different training opportunities. So with the council's support, I'd work with our city attorney just to prepare in advance an ordinance at our next meeting as well that would allow us to administratively grant those types of hold harmless agreements for training purposes.
Thank you, City Manager. So we've got two requests here out to discuss. The first is whether or not we can then support the City Manager to move forward with the indemnification agreement with Gallagher to pursue with an exercise. And then the second is to have a change in our ordinances for that to go forward much more easily. So let's start off with the first. Any questions or discussion regarding that request? Yes, Alderman Budmats.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. Question. Are we starting a fire in this building and putting it out?
No, there will not be any active fire.
So, in theory, if some company has already bid on the right to salvage the building, we're not in any way damaging their salvage rights.
Correct. We actually, our training officer went through the building with the demolition officer and representative from Gallagher. They've approved everything that we're going to train on and covered all those matters.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Alderman Kohler.
Thank you, Mayor. Question for City Attorney first, and then for the Fire Chief. City Attorney, can we do this today and give him authorization to do this?
You can give them the consensus to do this today,
Mhm.
and then you'll give the official approval via a ratification, so an after-the-fact approval at the July 11th meeting.
Is that going to give you sufficient time?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because that way I can tender the document to Gallagher.
Chief Suter, are we the only fire department participating in this, or any other municipalities invited to participate in this?
We generally train with a Palatine, Rolling Meadows, and Inverness get together and train on a regular basis. With the short notice, it'll be challenging to get everybody together at once.
Are they doing the same
to
thing?
them, and they would have to also tender the same.
Okay, that's my question. So
Yeah.
they would have to do the same before we allow them to do that?
Yes, and we've done this many times going to other towns before, back in the past, so.
Okay. So they're on notice to get that done too. Thank you, Mayor.
Question.
Go ahead,
So if we've
Alderman.
done this in the past before, who signed the hold harmlesses?
It was before my time, so this is going back years ago. I'm not sure.
Because I don't recall this ever occurring
No.
in the past coming to us.
And that's why I brought this forward in consultation with the city attorney to say, is this something we can do administratively, or is this something that comes to the council?
So I guess we'll get to that second.
I was just gonna say, okay, so if then we can move on to then the second point, which is adjusting our code of ordinances to allow for indemnifications as being an administrative option for the city manager since it's related to operations. Questions or comments on that? Alderman Budmats, go ahead.
So I would be in favor of allowing you to do that. However, I really feel like there should be some notice given to the city that you've done this so that we're aware of. It would be really unfortunate if a situation would arise where somebody would want us to indemnify or defend them in some kind of a suit. We had no idea that we'd agreed to this in advance. So if you would agree to notify us when you've done something like this, I think I could agree to give you the latitude to do it.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's reasonable for us to do regularly, and we'll work with our department directors to make sure that that's happening.
I do have a follow-up from that as well, Alderman Budmats. So would this be a requirement of the ordinance or the ordinance change to say, and there should be notification to the council in the form of XYZ, either in days or in format?
I think it should probably be his weekly report to us,
Okay.
because when we see that the fire department is doing something wherever, and, training and FYI,
Okay.
home harmless was executed by the manager, and then that way we've been notified of it.
Understood.
And the document itself should also denote that the manager is the only one authorized to be able to execute a hold harmless. That way there's that control process as well.
Alderman Kohler.
So I like the concept because you want to move fast on anything and you also don't want to burden the council with all these things that may come up, even though this doesn't come up often. But the only thing I'd ask in the ordinance is that you have a process in place, such as who's requesting it, and that we have some, in the ordinance, some review by city attorney and approval by the mayor or somebody else to kind of check and say they authorize it, so.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, so we'll do the first then with regards to allowing the city manager to pursue an indemnification agreement and hold harmless declaration with Gallagher for the exercise taking place as soon as possible.
Yes.
5 in favor, none opposed, so that's unanimous. And then the second item is to then pursue a change in our ordinances to allow this to become a routine operation with notification to the council. Also unanimous, 5 in favor and 0 opposed.
Thank you. And these two will also come back to the council for formal ratification and consideration of the ordinance.
Excellent. So with that, I would also like to entertain a motion to go into closed session. And this is under Section 5 of ILCS 120-2C1 of the Open Meetings Act regarding personnel to consider the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee of the public body. Do I have a motion? Thank you, Alderman Budmats, for the first, and thank you, Alderman McHale, for the second. Do we need a roll call vote for this?
Yes.
Okay, will the clerk please call the roll?
McHale. Yes. Budmats.
Yes.
Boucher.
Yes.
Reyes.
Yes.
Kohler.
Yes.
With 5 in favor and none opposed, we will now go into closed session. The audience and press are advised that we do not anticipate taking any action upon returning to open session. Thank you very much.